Um, they're the most important. I mean, it's the one where you know that you're performing the most vital role. You're sometimes coming at a moment when their family are completely, just don't know what to do and they need help through it. And so you know that you've got a really important job to do. And the other thing about funerals is that you hear such fascinating, incredible stories about people. And I was a journalist for much of my professional career, and that was the bit I missed, was kind of being given a reporting job and going somewhere and landing in the middle of somebody's life and asking questions and things. And when I set up my own business, that was the bit I really missed. And this has filled it. You get such fascinating insights into such amazing stories, which I'll tell you one or two. So I love funerals, and because they test you as well. I mean, they can be terribly hard. I mean, there are really difficult ones. So I'll start with one or two difficult ones. I've not done a funeral for an infant, a baby, stillbirth or just after birth, which is obviously a horrible thing, and we never, just a sort of tradition in the BHA, we never charge for them. We conduct them for nothing, but it's part of. I mean, a funeral for a baby is as important as any funeral, and a funeral for somebody with no family is as important as any other funeral. Every life needs to be marked. That is a sort of, that really, you could call it an article of faith, but faith isn't the right word for humanists, but it is one of the things that makes us want to be humanist ministers, celebrants. Call it what you will. One of my friends, David Deacon, who had done this much longer than I, he did a beautiful ceremony for somebody who had no friends and family. He just died in sort of old people's home, and there was nobody there but the funeral director and David and the coffin. And he went through it just because he felt a life shouldn't go unmarked, and he just wanted to say something, and obviously he was able to get some information about the person. And the nearest I've had to that was a man called John Hughes, who I think went to jail for some dreadful thing, because he kind of disappeared between having been born in Peterborough and going to the Navy or something. He disappeared and then turned up in South London, 20 years later. So I think he probably killed somebody or something dreadful and went to jail and came out. And was a sort of, unknown person who walked his dog and was seen in the betting shop. And there were a few people at the funeral. There were about half a dozen. One of whom briefed me a bit about his comings and goings. She sort of, there's often somebody who takes it upon themselves to organise somebody's funeral, because it's a very fundamental thing. We do all think when somebody dies, it matters, we've got to mark this. It's the right thing to do, to mark somebody's life. This is our last chance. He's gone. We can't just ignore it. We have to mark it. And this is what I said at the beginning of my funeral talk for John Hewitson. I said we have two tasks today. One is to do justice to John's memory, for we pay our respects even to those who die without any friends or family. It is an assertion of our common humanity. Every life matters. No one passes through life without leaving any impression on those around them. And John was not without friends, even though he hardly went out of his way to make them. You are here, and although this is a very small gathering, you're here because John Hewitson meant something to you. You glimpsed certain qualities in him. He you retain a strong impression of him. In various ways you will miss him. Which brings me to our second task, which is to bring some comfort, some sense of fulfillment to you, the living. And that leads me on to other difficult funerals, like suicides. I've had 3 of them, and a sort of drug addict. And there was one in which my main sort of task was to address. This was a young man of 21 who just, depression sort of, he'd always been a perfectionist, but depression kicked in a big way when he went to university, and he was just starting to have treatment, but I don't think his parents realised how badly in the grip of it he was. They went away for New Year and he stayed in London, and they came back to find him hanging from the banisters when they walked in the door. And so my task there was, and I can't remember how I started exactly, but I then said, I'm going to do what Heather, this is his mother, had asked me to do, and that's to try to address the question, why Ben committed suicide. There's no point in looking for the straw that broke the camel's back, any one action that might have tilted the balance the other way. If it hadn't been one thing, it might have been another. The one lesson you should learn from this tragedy is that if you ever feel a similar kind of despair creeping up on you or someone close to you, please, please look for help. You're not alone, and life is too precious to give up in this way. We must do everything we can to support each other and do our best to ensure that no such tragedy befalls anyone else. At times like this especially, we need to be loving and gentle, as ready to listen as to talk, honest with ourselves, and always open to the prompting of our hearts. Now, that was a sort of combination of Heather and me actually writing that. But I say it was very much what she wanted to do, what the parents wanted to do, and some of the young people there were wonderful and gave wonderful speeches. And in the end, terrible though this suicide was, I think the funeral was a great occasion. It was a celebration of his life, because it can sound a very empty phrase, the celebration of a life, but that is all you can do. You mark somebody's life and you try to remember the things that made them special. And as I say, it's about asserting the value of every human life, however it ended. And but you know, when people die in those circumstances, you have a job to sort of help people through it, to help them confront the shock. And I was pleased that she wanted me to do that. You know, she wanted to talk about why he committed suicide and try to make sense of it. There was another suicide which I'll just mention. It was a glamour photographer called Bob Carlos Clark. And this was a shocking one in a different way. I for myself, well, I shouldn't judge, but you know, if I'm honest, I felt very angry towards him. I felt it was a very selfish thing. It was an extraordinary thing to do, and I can't. But he died. He threw himself in front of a train. And I said, I'm going to begin with the most difficult bit, Bob's death, because it was so recent, so unexpected and so hard to accept. At about midday on Saturday the 25th of March, he appears to have mounted the barrier beside the level crossing at Barnes and deliberately put himself in the path of an oncoming train. It may have been a spur-of-the-moment decision, but Lindsay, his wife, and Scarlett, his 14-year-old daughter, were both well aware of his fascination of death and his fear of growing old. In retrospect, the signs were there that he might choose one day to end his life in some sudden and violent way. His own work was full of allusions to such things, and many of you here may have your own insights. For Lindsay, certainly, the manner of his death, although deeply shocking and wounding, was not entirely a surprise. And then I address the emotions, as I say. So we feel an extraordinary mixture of emotions today. There's anger, understandable anger towards Bob for doing such a terrible thing. Bewilderment. Why on earth should a good-looking, successful man in apparently sound health do away with himself at 55. Guilt. Could we not have helped him? Turned him away from self-destruction. Resignation. Well, if that's what he wanted, no one could have stopped him. Regret. What a terrible, avoidable waste. Then appreciation. For he was an extraordinary life-enhancing character, and it's hard to envisage him just fading quietly away. And gratitude for all that he gave you and left behind with you. So what I was doing there, I think, was trying to help his widow to voice her anger for her, and then get beyond it, because then, of course, we got into stories about Bob and celebrating him, and there was quite an upbeat sort of wake afterwards. But it's great if you can, if people are willing to confront things and talk about them. And I think time's too short for me to give you other extracts from a junkie. That was a tough one. I had to sort of talk to his children. This was his wife's suggestion. So, there are tough ones, but it's so worth doing, because you help people through something that's incredibly very difficult to talk about. It's very difficult not to talk about. Which is why I'm so keen to talk about it. Why I think it's so helpful. I hope it's helpful. People have told me it's helpful. So that's all one can do. I've had lots of funerals, some more memorable than others, some difficult interviews. Sometimes, going to see the next of kin can be like getting blood from a stone. It's really, sometimes, there are people who we don't want to talk about that. And you think, oh my God, what am I going to say? And then I seem to have a series of people I called Camden characters, whose next of kin would all just say, he's such a character. Oh yeah, such a character. And you'd say, well, in what way? Oh no, well, nothing really, You just have to be so patient and wait, and gradually something would come out, and you'd be able to voice this. And then there are skeletons in the cupboard. Again, I don't have time to, and I won't do justice to. I've never had any really, really terrible, embarrassing sort of things. But I will just tell you very briefly. My friend Steph, who trained at the same time as I did, she had a really, she had the funeral from hell, because she was briefed by the deceased's girlfriend, with whom he'd been living for a few years, and so she thought she'd got pretty full story, and maybe there was a friend there as well. Anyway, on the day, she was just sort of waiting. There was a bit of a disturbance at the entrance to the creme, whatever it was. And one of the funeral directors came up to her and said, Steph, I hate to tell you this, but they're your lot, and they're absolutely arsehole. They'd come straight from the pub, and they're all drunk as anything. And it was an open coffin, and the very sort of drunk woman at the front said, right, well, I'm Bob's wife. Who the fuck are you? And she'd no idea that this man had ever been married, and they were all drunk, and some of them sort of threw themselves on the coffin and had to be sort of hauled away.